My name is Dirango Maura, and I would like to declare my candidature for the Senate position of Nairobi County in the upcoming elections on August 9th, 2022. And I'm running as an independent. Now, this is my development agenda for Nairobi. Now, one of the biggest problems that we have in Nairobi is the issue of severe traffic congestion. Now, this costs us a lot of money in terms of lost man hours and burning fuel when cars are just stuck in traffic. And it's a quality of life issue. It's very frustrating to be stuck in traffic every single day for like 2 hours for most motorists during the rush hour. Now, the current regime is trying various solutions, which of course will fail. And they won't fail because they were not implemented correctly. They will fail because they don't take account certain factors that influence traffic congestion. For example, they recently finished the overhead highway, the toll road that is cutting across Nairobi. And that will relieve some of the traffic, but by and large, it will do nothing for the commute times for most, ordinary people. A big part of the problem is this. Only 7% of the total land area of Nairobi is dedicated to transport, whether it's railways, roads, or any kind of transport-related infrastructure. Now, the global standard is between 22 and 25%. In other words, a quarter of the land area in a city, in a major congested city, needs to be dedicated to transport. So even if they build out all the roads and all the streets and all the missing links, you'll still have only 7% of land being availed to move people to and fro. So that simply means the traffic situation will continue for a long time. So one of the solutions that I would propose something called a subway levy. Now this would be a tax strictly collected to be invested in building a subway system. A subway system is simply an underground electrified rail system for mass transit. So many times people use their cars for commuting because there simply isn't a viable or reasonable alternative. You can argue and say, why don't they use matatus? Well, matatus cannot ferry every single person that needs to be ferried. And matatus themselves constitute a huge part of the gridlock. Now, the only way to get people out of their cars, especially the people who do daily commuting to and from Nairobi, is to build an underground railway system that would serve the entire area where people live. Now, the current rail system that is above ground, it really doesn't work, for most people because it has very few stops and they don't cover majority of the city. So people simply don't use it because it doesn't go where they stay. So a subway levy will be the beginning of resolving the issue of mass transit in Nairobi. I mean, it's 2022. There is no reason why Nairobi doesn't have an underground electrified rail system for mass transit. The other problem that we have that greatly contributes to the gridlock of traffic in Nairobi is the fact that we don't have sufficient parking spaces. Now, you may think this is counterintuitive, but really it's not. For example, let me give you an example. When you look at very many streets, you'll find out that when they design the street, they don't design parking into the street. They build a very narrow lane, and then they dig a ditch, and that's it. So they don't build pedestrian walkways or parallel parking on the streets. Now, this is a problem because people do have cars. People will use their cars, and people need to stop and park their cars somewhere because this is a very large commercial city. Now, when people park their cars, they mostly do so illegally. They try to squeeze the car on the side of the road, but even then, they eat up probably 30% of the road. Now, when the road, which is already narrow, becomes even more narrower, what that means is that the traffic that is on the road has to slow down. And as it slows down, it builds up, bringing in tremendous gridlock. And then the other problem is the fact that the county government refuses to build pedestrian walkways along most streets creates a problem because pedestrians end up having to use the road, sharing the road with the cars. And you may not think that this is a big problem, but as pedestrians walk on the road, again, traffic slows down and it builds up. Now, you may think this is not such a big deal, but you go to Landis Road, or go to, as you're going along towards Kamkunji, look at the number of pedestrians that are using the road where the cars are supposed to use. The people are so many that cars, they don't move. Or if they move very slowly. And then this builds up traffic throughout the day along Landis Road. So you do need pedestrian walkways to be built, and you also need parallel parking to be built into most streets, which is, of course, the global standard. And this will enable to decongest the roads and allow for faster and more efficient movement of motorized traffic. The other problem that you have in Nairobi is water issues. Now, everyone who lives in Nairobi knows that majority of the time, there is no water being supplied by the county government because there is a shortage of water that they can supply. Now, the county government, in my opinion, are not doing their best to resolve this problem. Because if you go talk to them and ask them, why are you not able to supply each and every house with water 24/7? They'll give you various reasons. One of the major reasons that they'll give you is that they simply don't have sufficient water supply. So they have to practice water rationing. Now, for me, I think this is a lack of imagination, and the solution is really very simple. Now, when you study the Nairobi water system, you'll discover that there's clean water coming in, and then there's dirty water or sewage water going out. Now, the installed capacity to clean out the sewage water is about 1.3 million cubic meters of water every single day. So every day, the county is able to clean up 1.3 million cubic meters of water. Now, this is a lot of water. Now, what happens to this water or the sewage after they clean it up? What happens to it? They pump it into the river and it ends up in the Indian Ocean. So you keep on thinking to yourself, logically, if you are suffering from a perennial water shortage, why would you pump 1.3 million cubic meters of water into the Indian Ocean? The ocean doesn't require any more water. We need that water. So I keep on asking, why can't they recycle that water? Once they've cleaned it up at the various sewage plants, why don't they capture that water and reroute it back into people's homes? That's 1.3 million cubic meters of water daily that they let go into waste. And on this other side, on the supply side, they put us on water rationing. Now, does this make sense to you? Now, because you cannot reason with the leadership, it's very difficult to use logic and reason with them. What I would propose is a law forcing them to recycle the water. We can reuse that water. And when it comes to this sort of wastewater or discharged water, you can clean it up to 100% or even 50% or even 70%. And in many situations, you clean it up to different degrees and use that water appropriately. For example, when they build a road, they usually leave some reserve on the side of the road and they try to plant grass or flowers. We also have public parks like Uhuru Park and things of that nature. And many times when you visit these places or when you look at the grass that is growing on the side of the road, it's very dry because they don't irrigate it. When you ask them, why don't you irrigate it? They'll tell you we don't have water. So this water that they are pumping into Indian Ocean can be rerouted back into people's houses, and it can also be used to irrigate the various roads and parks that we have. So it's a question of being creative in getting solutions to these problems. So these problems are not so intractable or difficult. It's just that the leadership lacks creativity, because as you very well know, most of the leaders in Kenya are usually C students. So, the country is run by C students, and they may be doing their best, but their best is not good enough. Now, one of the biggest problems that we have in Nairobi is the housing crisis. A fully 40% of Nairobi residents live in slums and informal settlements. Now, this is embarrassing and unacceptable. In fact, Nairobi has become famous throughout the world for its housing crisis. Kibera is the largest slum in Africa. And this is a fact that the current government appears to be very proud of. They say that with glee and with pride, as if it's an accomplishment. For me, that is unacceptable. So I'm not here just to criticize. I'm also here to, give reasonable solutions. Now, this is my solution to the housing crisis and to the slum crisis in Nairobi. Number one, we need to stop the growth and spread of slums in Nairobi. Now, how do we do this? One of the principal ways that slums expand is through rural to urban migration. Now, the only way to stop this is to introduce what is called a movement and residency permit. In other words, anyone who is trying to move into Nairobi must first apply to the county government for permission to move into Nairobi. They need a residency permit if they were not born in Nairobi. What that means is that in their application, they'll have to prove where they stay. You cannot just show up in Nairobi and go to the nearest slum and set up another Mabati structure. Because once you have millions of people doing that, then the slum problem will continue forever. And some of the land that is occupied by these slums is land meant for public utility, such as roads, hospitals, schools, etc. In other words, it's not free land. Like Kibera is seated on what used to be the Nairobi Yacht Club. So we no longer have a yacht club, do we? But we do have slums in exchange. There's a very nice forest there. Well, it's mostly gone because now it's a slum. And this level of poverty is considered violence upon the people. Now, that's just one solution. Stop new people moving into the slum from other parts of the country. Okay, now what do we do with the people who live inside the slums right now? Be it Kibera or Mathare or Kwaruben or all these other places. Well, the only solution to this problem is studying the problem itself. Now, if you go to the slums and informal settlements and you ask the people, why do you live here? They'll tell you because we cannot afford to live anywhere else. In other words, what they're saying is the cost of housing is so high that they can never afford it at their current wages, if any. Now, the only solution is to give people land. Because the problem is not the slum is the manifestation of the problem. The problem is landlessness by the urban poor. So what you do, we acquire about 400,000 acres from adjoining areas, because if you just go south of Nairobi, you'll find vast amounts of empty land. Acquire through eminent domain about 400,000 acres and split this land into 40 by 80 plots, and then catalog each and every family that lives in all these slums, do a census of them, register them, get to know who they are, count the number of households, and then allocate to each and every household free land. Give them a plot of 40 by 80. In this way, you'll be giving them an economic floor below which they cannot fall into absolute and extreme poverty, as is the situation right now. And in giving them the land, it will form a foundation for generational wealth. This is how you conquer poverty. So this is what I would do. I would propose such a bill and push it through in order to eliminate the extremities of urban poverty. And once we allocate this land, we will expect every single person in the slum to take up their plot. They'll be given like 9 months to take up their plot and move there. And then in the meantime, once the people move to the newly acquired plot, we will demolish each and every slum and prevent anyone else from trying to move into those slums. I think this is the best way of resolving this issue long term. Now, which brings about the other issue that Nairobi faces, which is a lack of revenue. Now, I know this is an administrative issue, but I still think it has a solution. And the problem with Nairobi lacking revenue is that millions of people who work in Nairobi, derive their income and their profit from Nairobi, do not live in Nairobi. So in other words, they make the money off Nairobi, but they do not invest that money within Nairobi. This is not their fault. Okay, so you have millions of people who live in adjoining counties, but they work in Nairobi and they make money and then they take the money out into those other counties. And my issue with this is this. They are using facilities availed by the county of Nairobi. They are using our roads, our water, our sewer services, all sorts of services they use in Nairobi. But because they don't live inside Nairobi, they don't pay taxes to the Nairobi county government. But they are beneficiaries of the services provided, however limited, by the county government. Now, this is not fair. This can't be okay. So the only solution is to capture these people and make sure that they're paying taxes in Nairobi. But because they don't live in Nairobi, this is difficult. So the only way around that is to annex all these areas where they live in. Yeah, I believe and I think, and I would sponsor legislation to expand Nairobi territorially. In other words, I want to take over each and every area where the people who work in Nairobi live. And so we would annex, under my plan, we would annex Limuru, Githunguri, Kiambu, Ruiru, all the way to Juja, crossing over to Machakos County. We would annex all the way to Kilimambogo, coming back south to Joska, Kamulu, all that area around Rai, coming back south to Katani, Ngelani, Mlolongo, going all the way to Isinya, Kajiado, Ngong. Let's pull in all these areas and consolidate them under one county, because these are the places where people who work in Nairobi live, and they need to pay taxes within Nairobi because they're making their money in Nairobi. Now, I would also open up those areas. For example, I would propose a highway to be built from the Machakos turnoff, the intersection of the road that goes into Machakos from Mombasa Road, A109, going straight north, all the way to the Thika Garissa Road, and crossing over the A3 into Kabati, and then ending up on the A2 at Makuyu. Now, if we build such a highway, and of course, if you're building a highway, it's always prudent to also build a railroad right beside it, we would open up about 4 million additional acres that could be occupied by the people of Nairobi. And it is from these 4 million acres that would take 10% of 400,000 acres and allocate them to the extremely poor people who live in the slums. So in this way, we eliminate the slums and we open up new areas for occupation. And it doesn't require much. It only requires a little bit of investment into infrastructure, like a few roads, a few feeder roads, and of course electricity and piped water. Now, in the new areas, in the newly acquired areas, we would also pass proactive laws to prevent the rise of new slums in those new areas, and to prevent traffic jam and gridlock, because a lot of the gridlock that you find in Nairobi is just from very poor road design. For example, when you study the roads that are built in Nairobi, most of them go nowhere. You go look at the map, you'll find that they're going to dead end. They go to like Outer Ring Road. Where does it go? It literally goes nowhere. It goes from Thika Road to a dead end in the airport. It doesn't cut through. And that's how they generally design roads in Nairobi. It's unbelievable that the designers, have degrees in urban planning. I don't understand how that is possible. But anyway, the most efficient road network that you could design is called a box pattern. Very simple pattern. Have certain roads going north, south, and others going east, west. So you build a box grid or a square grid. So under my proposal, in the newly acquired areas, because they're mostly flat, okay, to the south of Nairobi, it's mostly flat. It's not very hilly. So what you do is that every 1.5 kilometers, you build a road that is going north-south and east-west, every 1.5 kilometers. And this road must be dual. It has to be a dual carriageway with great separation, with a grassy median in between. And the size of the grassy median cannot be less than 20 feet. Because when you look at Gong Road, you'll notice that, yes, they did separate the grades, right? They dualized it. But the median is very narrow. In places, it's 3 feet. And quite frankly, I don't understand, because they left a lot of road reserve to the side. I'm like, why not capture that road reserve and put it on the inside? And so because they designed Ngong Road the way they did, you remember there was that issue of people hitting the curb. So this is called incompetent design. And don't even get me started, because anyway, so in the newly acquired areas, we do not want them to design the usual absurd roads that they do. It's very simple. Build 2 lanes on either side and a grassy median that is 20 feet wide, so that if you need people to make a U-turn, they have sufficient space to move away from the traveling lanes and make their U-turn comfortably. So there are very many things we could discuss about the design, the spatial design of the new areas. But all I wanted to say is that we really need to fight the way they zone most of the urban areas, because their zoning laws allow for the creation of slums. And for me, a slum, I know maybe to you, you're thinking a slum is a shantytown. No, for me, a slum is more than just a shantytown. For me, places like Pipeline, Githurai, all those are slums as far as I'm concerned. The mere fact that the building is made of stone doesn't mean that the area is not a slum. It's a slum because look at the facilities. Look at the way the place looks, how dirty, filthy, untidy, poorly designed, poorly planned it is. There's no pedestrian walkways because they allow people to pull the building all the way to the roadside curb so that pedestrians don't have a place to walk. You can't even ride a bicycle laneway in Nairobi because you'll have to ride it on the main road and you risk getting killed by cars, by traffic, isn't it? So we want to push Nairobi from a third world city to a first world city. And this only takes discipline. and proper zoning laws. Now, for example, in the newly acquired, newly annexed areas, we'd zone it properly. For example, all the mechanics, you put them in one place. Yeah, all garages, anything to do with that, you put it in one place. Hospitals, put it in one place. Banking and certain commercial activities in one place. Industries in one place. Don't mix and match. Apartments, put them in one location. Single family houses in one particular location. Don't mix everything up. That is disorderliness. And we want orderliness. You see what I'm saying? And of course, have very rigid parking requirements. Don't allow people to pull a building all the way to the curb. Leave some space. Between a building and the road, you need to leave some space. As far as I'm concerned, if the road is a major artery, the amount of space you're supposed to leave between the road and a building should not be less than 200 feet, so that you don't get the feeling of claustrophobia. Push the buildings away from the main arterial roads. You know, if we can just follow a few of these rules, we'll end up having with a city that looks like a world-class city. There is no excuse to reproducing slums everywhere. Almost every new area that is opened up for settlement always looks horrible. Unplanned buildings, poorly designed buildings, unfinished buildings, buildings that are way too close to each other. For example, you go to places like Githurai, you'll see buildings, apartment buildings that are literally built next to each other. Like they're only living like 3 feet from one building and another. And there are windows facing those walls, so that when you enter into those units, they're always dark during the day. You have to switch on your electricity because it's always dark, because the windows open up to nothing except another building. Now, this cannot be healthy even psychologically. Can't be a nice place to live, where you never ever see the sun, you never see the sky, because the buildings are too close. Why do they allow this to happen? Because, like I said before, most of the leadership of the county, these are C students. So they're doing their best, maybe, but their best is simply not good enough. It's time we got rid of them. So the important thing to remember in resolving the housing crisis in Nairobi is the need to give the urban poor a free plot of land measuring 40 by 80. And in order to prevent them from selling this piece of land and going back to the slum, we put a restriction on the deed that it cannot be transferred before 7 years are over. And every recipient must develop that piece of land. You have to move on it. It cannot lie idle. And the need to immediately, once we've allocated everyone a piece of land, the need to immediately demolish every single slum. In the case of Kibera, the Nairobi Yacht Club can be rebuilt. The dam can be expanded to make it into a bigger lake, and trees can be replanted, turn it into a forest. The other issue that we face in Nairobi is called quality of life issues. Now, Nairobi is clearly a third world city, and the quality of life for most residents is very, very poor, because most places there's no pedestrian walkway. In most places there's filth and trash all over the place, horrible smells. In very many places there's sewage that is flowing freely on top of the road. In most places there's no public playgrounds. There are no green spaces where people can relax or get away from everything. In other words, this is a typical third world city. Now, quality of life issues, I think, is very important. I think it is, if you're going to spend your entire life in a city, it needs to be made comfortable for people. Now, I'm proposing that every square mile, the county government must be forced, because they won't do it willingly, and you can't reason with them, so we have to force them through legislation to open and maintain a public garden of at least 3 acres, a place where people can go jogging, and they should also be induced or forced to put in free exercise equipment in those public gardens, so that you can go exercise, you can go jog, you can take your children to ride their bicycle. You should also have a children's playground. We need that. I mean, just think of a place like Pipeline. Huge, it's a concrete jungle, not a single blade of grass or tree anywhere. If those people, those residents, want to relax somewhere, where do they go? There's no provision at all within the neighborhood. This is not acceptable. Every square mile must have some kind of public garden maintained by the county government. So I would push for that. The other quality of life issue is the question of safety on the roads. Now, most of us have to use the roads that are within the city. Now we have new roads being built, highways being built, but none of these new highways that are being built would pass what is called a road safety audit. In fact, in a serious country, they would have to be shut down immediately. and be redesigned and rebuilt to be safe. For example, let me give you an example of the Southern Bypass. The Southern Bypass has become one of the most dangerous roads for motorists. There are so many fatal accidents there. No, you wonder, how is that possible? Because it's dualized. What's the problem? The problem is this: whoever built that road did not follow common sense rules to keep the road safe for motorists. Let me give you an example. The Southern Bypass does not have a concrete divider in between the two lanes. So when something happens on one lane, the cars end up onto oncoming traffic with fatal results, only because there is no concrete divider separating those two lanes. The other problem you'll notice is that anytime you build a road that is rated 100 kilometers per hour, not only do you have to put a concrete divider, concrete barrier, you also need to put an emergency lane on one side of the road, depending on the number of lanes. Now, in this case, they did not put any emergency lane. What that means is that if a car breaks down on the highway, there's nowhere to move it away from the traveling lanes. And because the cars are traveling really fast, by the time the cars that are behind this broken down car reach it, they don't realize that it's not moving, with fatal results. Again, this is an oversight. Now, when you look at the case of Thika Road, which is really used by the people of Nairobi, you'll notice not only did they not put an emergency lane, they also did not put acceleration or deceleration lanes. Now, what that means is that they will point you out to the exit, and you'll see you can exit the highway, but there is no provision for a deceleration lane. A deceleration lane, if the road is rated at 100 kilometers per hour, you need to provide at least 350 meters so that cars can decelerate safely and enter the service or the service street that is provided outside the main highway. In the case of Thika Road, they didn't do that. You barely get 50 meters to exit, to slow down from 100 kilometers per hour to 20 kilometers per hour. So it is never safe. And that also contributes greatly to the traffic. For example, when you're going to Kasarani, the traffic, when the traffic is trying to exit Thika Road, it backs up for almost 2 kilometers because they didn't provide a decent enough deceleration lane. So it contributes to the gridlock on Thika Road. So there are all these things that they overlook, and I'm not sure whether the issue is incompetence or lack of knowledge, but I always say, how can they lack knowledge, yet they have engineering degrees in civic engineering and road construction? So how can it be an oversight? It can't be an oversight. Can it be incompetence? Maybe, but mostly, as far as I'm concerned, it's malice. There has to be something else going on for them to design roads almost on purpose to kill people. Let me give you a real life example. Now they are expanding the Eastern Bypass. Now when you're coming from Ruai, the bridge, going towards Ruiru, when you travel like 1.5 kilometers towards Ruiru from Ruai, you'll notice that the road takes a dip and a curve. And the dip is severe enough that you cannot see more than a few hundred, you can't even see a few hundred meters ahead of you at that particular point. And at the lowest level of that dip, there's a road that intersects the Eastern Bypass. That road goes to Infinity Park. Now, at Infinity Park, there are new up-and-coming neighborhoods. And there are children who daily cross the Eastern Bypass to go to school in Ruai or other places. Now, in the original design, because I saw the original design of the Eastern Bypass, whoever designed it had put in place a bridge so that the traffic going to Infinity Park would go above the Eastern Bypass. Now, when you read the minutes of the Ministry of Roads, when they're discussing that particular design, they made a decision to remove the bridge. Yet there are children who have to cross that road. Now, when you dualize that road, children will be forced to cross 4 lanes of highway, and the cars on that road are rated to move at 100 kilometers per hour. So I want you to think that these people at the ministry made a decision not to build a bridge, virtually guaranteeing that children will die at that spot. And they know children will die at that spot. But the level of malice, that's why I say, the level of evil, that rules over us is pretty extreme. They know kids will die at that point. It doesn't take rocket science. But despite knowing that, they still chose not to build a bridge at Infinity Park. And there's no one to intervene. No one. We do have a senator right now in Nairobi. We have MPs of that area, MCAs. No one cares. This is the nature of the evil that is in charge of the country. So we don't have to take these poor road designs that appear to be on purpose designed to kill us and our kids. We can intervene. So these are some of the things that I will be looking at, so that even as they are approving the roads, I'll be looking through all those documents to see the way they are designing these roads and whether it is safe for residents. Right now, there's no one to do that because no one cares, quite frankly. You know, the official attitude is that you can die if you want. But my attitude is different. We need to stop and reduce the number of traffic fatalities within Nairobi. Outer Ring Road is another absolute disaster, you know, and the government keeps on complaining that there's vandalism when they put in a fence to prevent people from crossing these highways at non-designated spots. The fence is vandalized because it's, you know, they put in metallic fences. But I always ask, why not use a different material? You could use concrete, could use plastic. Why are they so obsessed about using metal and they know it's going to get vandalized? It doesn't make sense, isn't it? Yeah, so there's a lot that can be done to improve, you know, public safety and pedestrian safety and the safety of our children when it comes to roads. And this is a subject that I can continue talking about it for hours. But the bottom line is, what I want you to take home is that I do monitor these situations and I would intervene if I had the capacity to intervene to prevent them from building the unsafe roads that they love to build for us. I don't know whether you've ever noticed that the trees that the county government plants, anytime if they plant trees, have you ever noticed that none of them are fruit trees? Now, personally, I think it's very malicious to go around planting trees that don't produce any kind of fruit. When you look at the levels of poverty in Kenya, you'd think that they'd plant fruit trees all over the place so that in due season, the very poor people can at least have fruit to eat. I mean, you see the number of street families, don't you? Why don't they ever plant avocado trees? They grow very well in Nairobi. How come they never plant mango trees? They grow very well. Lookwards, all sorts of trees can grow in Nairobi. They make sure that they never plant any fruit trees anywhere. And I think this is something that needs to be reversed because we need to have pro-poor policies. And I won't even talk about the violence meted out on hawkers by the Nairobi County enforcement personnel. I don't know whether they are how do you call them? Are they police or what? These kanjo thugs. So there's a lot of hostility to poor people, yet half the population is poor in Nairobi. So this needs to change. We need to be more humane in the policies and create situations that are not so traumatic for people who are already experiencing extreme poverty. Now, the other issue that comes up in Nairobi, I don't know whether you realize or you noticed that the Nairobi County government almost has a policy against employing native-born Nairobians. In other words, if you're born in Nairobi, it's very difficult for you to get a job in the county government. Just go talk to all those people at the county. Talk to any officials. You'll discover that almost none of them are born in Nairobi. So they do discriminate against the native population of Nairobi. Now we need to change this immediately. In fact, I would propose that only native-born Nairobians should be able to get employment at the county. Yeah, why should they employ people coming in from different counties and refuse to employ people who are born right here in Nairobi? Nairobi belongs to the people who are born here. There are native-born people and then there are immigrants. Why do they prioritize immigrants over Nairobi people? Like, have you ever met a Kanjo person who told you, oh, I was born in Buru, I was born in Langata, I was born in Otiende, I was born in Dandora? Never. So what happens to all the young people who are born in Nairobi? Where do they go? Who gives them work? Because if you can't get a job in your own county, where are you supposed to go to get a job? Because trust me, if you go to some of these other counties, they will not employ you if you were not born there. They don't care. They'll tell you to your face. We prioritize our own people. So why can't Nairobi County also prioritize the people who are born and raised in Nairobi for all these jobs? So I would pass a law outlawing the hiring of people who are not born in Nairobi. Every single person who works for the county government must be born in Nairobi. And we would have policies preventing C students and D students from getting jobs. We want the best and the brightest so that we can have a world-class city. Thank you.